Good morning. It is, what is it, October the 10th? Already, my gosh, not that far to go until the crazy holiday season again, is it? Anyway, good morning. You are listening to PRBites and the Public Relations Podcast. I've got 3 headlines for you. First one, is your organization under threat from coded language? The Trojan Horse approach and why you might be wanting to use it. And a quick tip on keeping your boss or your client on side. This is, as usual, I'm reading out the newsletter, which I've just sent out a short time ago, the PRBites newsletter. So if you want to get the links to these stories that I've been talking about, or any of the sort of further information by following those bits, or just skim through to the articles or the stories that you want to actually hear or read, then feel free to go to the website, thepublicrelationspodcast.com, thepublicrelationspodcast.com, and click on the newsletter button, and you can subscribe to the written newsletter. Right, let's get started. So the first section of the newsletter today was the I Spotted section. And there's clearly a campaign underway to promote the leather industry. I caught a segment on the radio the other day while driving to the shops, discussing arguments against vegan leather, saying it was unenvironmental, and there were all sorts of claims in it. I wasn't really listening to the actual detail of it. I was listening to it from a comms perspective, but there were things like the fact that it contained plastics or something like that. Don't quote me on it. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about comms. Then last night, I read a piece on the Drums website, authored by someone from Leather UK, and the piece wasn't positioned as an article about the pros and cons of synthetic leather, but rather as a study of marketing around the topic. And it had a sort of more practical tone. It was focusing on how messaging is used in marketing, what arguments are put forward in marketing and what facts should be used to support arguments. The thing is, it still contained all the arguments in favour of leather, which is you wouldn't be surprised by because it's written by Leather UK. So if we look at what's happening here, it's a well-targeted piece. So if you ask yourself, first of all, where are the people you need to convince, then the marketing and the communications industry is likely to be a sector where you'll find people who are more open to using and supporting synthetic leather. So box 1 is ticked. It's the right market. You found the people you want to try and reach with your message. So how then do you deliver it? So the next thing then is it's presented as an article about marketing. It doesn't argue in favour of one particular thing. Instead, it discusses the importance of clear, balanced marketing and the effective use of facts and figures in terms of that research and what you're putting out. But as you read the piece, as you read this particular piece that I put the link to in the newsletter, it still contains all the core arguments that the industry is trying to put across as part of its campaign, such as the contents of synthetic leather. The point is, the marketing article is carrying the core message to a demographic that you want to reach. Now, as usual, it's up to you whether you want to, whatever you feel about the topics I talk about in this. I'm only interested in things from a comms perspective. So this could be leather, it could be, environmental fuel, it could be anything. You'll have to make your own mind up at that. But if we look at it from a comms point of view, ultimately it makes a lot of sense the way this has been done because it's delivering your story in a more palatable way to the audience you're trying to reach, an audience that may sometimes be hard to convince. So often as a journalist, when I was a journalist, you got these really bad stories pitched to you that were probably what the client or the company wanted you to pitch. And yet if it had been packaged, if it had been surrounded with a better hook, it might have actually run. It is basically like the Trojan Horse idea. You're putting a good package around a core message. So the article wasn't exactly subtle. It was pretty clear what they were saying, but it was interesting to see how they were trying to use this message to deliver their core message to different platforms. People, I think, often fail to do this when they think about getting across the core message across. If you wrap it in different ways, that core message can serve many markets. I used to use an example a few years ago when I would talk about accountancy firms. And if you want to reach accountants, you want to think about what they do outside of their industry too. So let's say accountants go sailing. In that case, how can you package a financial story in a way that relates to the sailing business or the industry or their hobby that would be of interest to a sailing publication? You get the point. So that was story 1 in I Spotted. Story 2 in I Spotted was about how do you get people to support your organization and become its advocates? Well, I came across an interesting piece from Reuters about an investigative journalist that actually reminds us what works when it comes to this. Now, this particular journalist is a crime reporter, often going up against powerful organizations and criminal networks. And the problem was the reporters have limited resources and might make mistakes or miss things as a result. And what they said was that by sharing their mission, by explaining their limitations, and by engaging people in what they're trying to achieve, they built a base of support that supported them even when they inevitably made some mistakes or things were left out. So the takeaway is simple. If people feel invested in what you're doing, they're more likely to stick with you through setbacks and act as those free marketers that all organizations would love to have on board. If people feel you're genuinely fighting for their interests, whether you're saving them money or removing pain from their lives in some other way, they're going to appreciate it. It's that law of reciprocity. Okay, next section in the newsletter was the interesting things section I spotted. And I was reading a review of a panel discussion about AI in communications on PR Week. And there was a comment buried near the end that really stood out to me. And he touched on the problem of coded language and how current sentiment analysis tools struggle to capture this accurately. And the issue is this. If people use language that appears positive, but actually it's being critical, then it's very hard for sentiment tools to detect it accurately. The commenter suggested that AI has the potential to read between lines and better grasp these nuances, but there aren't many ways to do that effectively right now. Now, as communication pros, getting it right is obviously crucial, or it can backfire. If you know me well, you'll know that as a Brit, I was brought up with sarcasm. Saying something is good to mean something is bad is something we're well trained to do in Britain, far better trained than any sentiment tool. So one example of this happened last year in the gaming world. A game called Starfield won the most innovative gameplay category at the 2023 Steam Awards. But that raised eyebrows because the game had received very mixed reviews, with many calling it the complete opposite of innovative. Now, while the developers were thrilled, and I agree with them, they should embrace that win, the reaction from the community rather indicated that this was actually just a joke vote, a sarcastic dig at the game's shortcomings. People were voting for it as a laugh. So as I say, while the studio embraced the win, it felt like they hadn't got the joke, and it made them look even more out of touch. I mean, it's a tough one, actually. It's a good scenario to try and think about how you would actually deal with that. I think you have to embrace it and treat it as if it's an endorsement, but the problem was that then they got a lot of backlash again for not getting the joke. There was also an example of the case of Bic Pens, and they released a For Her series. And this sparked a backlash for its attempts to create a gender-specific pen. And people responded using positive language, such as, "I never knew I needed a woman's pen to help me write." But, well, you can hear it in my voice as you're listening to the audio version of this. But the tone was obviously dripped with sarcasm. Now, if you looked at those comments at face value, if you looked at them as pure words, you might think that was an endorsement. But it was pretty clearly not. The key point here is that understanding the context of comments is critical, clearly. We can't just skim through a handful of isolated remarks and assume we know what a community says. Until AI really can understand sarcasm as effectively as a British person, it will be about truly engaging with the community, staying aware of trends and recognizing when people are using humor or sarcasm to mark criticism. The use of coded language is only going to increase as platforms crack down on overtly negative content. People are finding new, subtle ways to express their frustration without being immediately flagged. And this isn't just a problem for big companies. It could happen at any level, from a major corporation to your local bakery. It could be easy to misinterpret comments, get excited about supposed praise, and then realize too late that the entire community was actually being critical, which could be a PR problem in itself. So I think there are two main lessons from this. I mean, this all came out of just a quick comment as I saw at the end of that article. But number one, until AI gets better, be an active participant in the communities you're monitoring. It's not enough to drop in, skim a few comments, and think you've got the gist. Second, be aware of subgroups within these communities. As we discussed, no one community exists around what anyone does anymore. There are countless subcultures within the community. It's not about saying this is what the community thinks. It's about understanding the layers and the nuances of the groups within it. Only then can you really grasp what people are trying to say and then react to it in a way that will truly resonate with them. A couple more points in the PRBites newsletter. What did we, oh, that was it. Next one was what people are telling me, and the final one was a quick tip from a guest. What people are telling me. Oh, this was actually, I had a conversation yesterday with someone who had an amusing analogy about targeting campaigns. And we were talking about how to make sure you reach the right people. And they said at one point during the conversation, and it just like popped up this. He said there's something like this. He said, there's no point fishing in a river full of trout if you're trying to catch salmon, which I thought was actually quite a good analogy. You know, the point they were making was that even the best campaign with tons of messaging, social media activity, and well-crafted content is going to fall flat if it's reaching the wrong people, the wrong outlets, and not reaching the right people. And finally, for PRBites today, actually, there's another couple of little bits, but a tip from a guest. Here's a tip I picked up from a guest on the podcast recently. Whether you're working in an agency or in-house, your role is more than just creating communication strategies. You're also there as a trusted communicator. If your boss or client comes to you asking for help drafting an internal letter or an email, and they value your expertise as a communicator, seize that opportunity. As I was talking to this guest, they mentioned how they'd had clients approach them before for support with things outside of the usual scope. And by stepping in, they built a lot of goodwill as a result. So don't limit yourself to just the official campaign work. If you have the opportunity to help in another way, helping out particularly on a personal level, getting them out of a personal embarrassment is a great way to deepen a relationship and add value beyond what's expected. Right, that's almost it. What else is there worth saying? Oh, it's probably actually the comms question time that I've only kind of touched on a little bit over PRBites and on the podcast. More recently is nearly here. I've got the final recording next week of the third pilot show. And then obviously I've got to do some launching of that myself. One of the challenges, which I think will be interesting, and I'll talk more about the stuff that I'm going to do behind it, or to sort of push it out and get some awareness of it, is the fact that there are two target markets. One, which I've talked about before, is the comms curious businesses. It's people that I really want to try and reach to explain the value of what you do as communicators. I really want to get across this message about how important PR and comms is, particularly in the AI era as we move into the future. I've talked about it before. So number one is I want to reach not PR people as one of the audiences. I want to reach businesses, comms curious businesses. The second group are PR and comms people. Now, if you think about it, they are, if we go back to that analogy of the fishing pond, they are two very different markets with different needs and different messaging and different people who are going to react in different ways. So I really need to have a think about how I'm going to do that. And the other challenge, of course, as always, is I make this podcast. I do so much other stuff around this, and I've got to try and find a way to do a bit of marketing on this that I can actually fit around my normal working day. Right, that's it for the moment. Being Thursday, there won't be another PRBites until next Tuesday, so have an absolutely awesome weekend. As usual, let me know what you're up to as well. I really do. I love hearing from you about the things that you're doing, and also if any particular stories or any particular items I pick resonate with you or you've had experience with as well. Do let me know. You can reach out to me anytime on LinkedIn. Search for Richard Midson, Midson. You can connect with me there. And, just finally, just a quick reminder again, if you want to get the print version of the newsletter and you don't get that yet, just head to the publicrelationspodcast.com and click on the newsletter button. That's it for now. Have an awesome weekend. I will speak to you next week.